So one of the things that's important is when we evolve these algorithms on a portion of the patients, it's very possible for them to be so fitted to those patients that they don't work on new patients.
Okay.
So imagine all the prostate cancer patients we had in the data set in the training group. Let's say a third of the patients we used to train the algorithms and evolve. Let's say all the prostate cancer patients wore blue shirts and that was in the data, and none of the non-cancer patients had blue shirts. Well, the algorithm would pick up on that, and it would say blue shirts are a diagnostic for prostate cancer.
Okay.
That's overfitting, right? That's exploiting something by chance that shouldn't be there. Well, if you then subject that algorithm to another third of the patients or beyond, it will fail because the chances of blue shirts corresponding to prostate cancer are pretty much zero, right? So when you solve that problem of how do you pick the right algorithm out of an evolved population so that it holds up on new patients, that's the central problem we spent 3 years on at the beginning of the company. How do we make sure these algorithms work on new patients so we don't kill people, right? And believe me, it's the thorniest intellectual problem I've ever tackled. Well, one of the components of it is you have to look at the errors and how they sort of look mathematically, the errors for each algorithm. Now, what's really interesting about this is that the errors and the way they're distributed mathematically corresponds to something called Brownian motion, which is the way smoke particles or gas particles move in a room. What's really interesting is why are they called Brownian motion? Well, because in the mid-1800s, there was a botanist named Brown. And he was famous for going every place and doing these nice sort of colored drawings of all the plants and naming them. And the famous example was Clarksia puchella. And I have an original lithograph from, or I don't know if it's a lithograph or a drawing from him. I bought it at auction because he took the pollen from it and put it in the microscope. And you notice the pollen was moving, you know, they put it in between two slides with water and the pollen was vibrating. And he thought the pollen was alive initially. Later, it came out that no, what's going on is the water molecules, because there's heat in them, are jostling the pollen, and under a microscope, you can see that. And that motion became known as Brownian motion because his name is Brown. Well, what's interesting is in 1905, Einstein wrote 4 papers published. One of them, which he won the Nobel Prize for, was about Brownian motion and the equations for particle-based Brownian motion and the transfer of heat in physics. And so his mathematics described the jostling of the particles that Brown observed. Now, here's what's interesting. It turned out that if you sort of march forward to World War II, the British were having a problem, which was the German planes were getting through too much. And they were, I think, expending about 2,500 anti-aircraft shells per plane to bring them down. It was unsustainable. And they did a number of things. They adopted the American proximity fuse. They got radar. But one of the things they did was they had a mathematician who came from elsewhere in Europe, Norbert Wiener, and he made a model of the German plane's physics and said, okay, every quarter second or so, here's the cone of probabilities of where they are, and the gunners need not to try to lead the plane, but put a couple of 2 or 3 or 4 shells into that cone of probability, and he radically reduced the number of shells. Well, his math was Brownian motion based.
Oh my gosh.
Now then you go forward to finance and derivative securities, options, futures, and so forth. And there's a very famous, now known as slightly incomplete model, but it was very groundbreaking at the time, the Black-Scholes option pricing model. And it's an equation that allows you to model a call option or a put option on stocks, the right to buy or sell it at a future time. And that's based on the potential movements of the stock going forward. Well, the movements of stock are Brownian motion. So that equation has elements that look like particle physics and look like Einstein's Brownian motion equations. And you can carry this forward into statistics. So it happened to be that I was exposed to a number of things like this.
Because of your economics.
Right,
education.
and just reading a bunch and working on derivative securities in graduate school and so on. And talking to my former statistics professor who said, you can use the information in errors to help your model as long as you do certain things. And it struck me that that's one of the things we could do. And so we tested and we found. So this is what I mean by we're borrowing ideas from these great people that came before us and repurposing them to a totally different domain because they turn out to be applicable.
That's insane.
There are people before us, Justin, that the work they did was staggering. And again, it is there to be farmed. It's gorgeous.